have time to tell my story. Actually, well, this is just part of the story. This goes back to 1,500 years ago. I'm going back to 7,000 years ago. And so far, it's the first personal story this evening. So it doesn't mean that I'm 7,000 years old. But I'm starting with the origin of the story. It's actually where I came from. I'm from Mesopotamia. The Greek name for the land between rivers. So I'll start actually with some bits and stories from that land up to this day. And we'll make the theme, my theme, fate in search of fortune. So I'll go back maybe to one of the most ancient written literature, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was the 5th king of Uruk. And he reigned around 2500 before Christ. He was the 5th king of Uruk. His mother was Ninsun, goddess Ninsun. So he was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. He was huge, he was so strong. And he was actually oppressing his people by a law called the Lord's Right, which allowed him to sleep with the women on the first night of marriage. So the woman cried to the gods, asking for help. And the gods actually responded. So they created Enkidu. Enkidu is a wild man, covered with hair. He was living in the wilderness with the beasts. So then, he was just sabotaging the tracks of the hunters to protect his friends, the animals. And they went, the hunters, and complained to Gilgamesh. So they agreed, and they said, okay, we'll send somebody to him to seduce him and bring him to the city. So they sent Shamhat, the temple whore, and she seduced him and brought him to the city. And actually, he had a fight with Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh won, but they became friends. And they went for adventures in the Cedar Mountain. And then they met Humbaba. They killed Humbaba. So the goddess Ishtar was upset. So again she said, Kukalana. Kukalana was the bull of heaven. Again, they killed him. So she was upset. And she sentenced Enkidu to death, which was very hard on Gilgamesh. And he started his journey to the underworld, seeking eternity. But then he was told by the wise guy who survived the big flood that eternity is people's work. So he went back and he built the 7 walls around Uruk. So I was born in the city of Sinbad the Sailor. After 25 years, I moved to the city of 1001 Nights, which is about, again, a king, Shahrayar, who was going to visit his brother, the other king, in his kingdom. After a few hours travel, he remembered that he forgot his gift to his brother, so he went back to the palace, and he saw his wife with one of his slaves. So he killed them both. And he decided that from that night, he would try to select beautiful virgins, marry them, and kill them in the morning. And that continued. So people started to flee the city. They left the city because they were afraid for their daughters. And one day, the daughter of the minister saw him very worried. She said, "What's happening, Dad?" He said, "I cannot find anybody for the king to marry." She said, "I'll go." So Shahrazad went, and she had a trick with the king. She made her sister come to visit her and ask her if she can tell her a story or something. So she started a story, and the king was very much impressed with the story, but she stopped once the night was over, before finishing the story. And the king was very curious to listen to the rest of the story. So he kept her for another night, and another night, and another night. And the story was just about genies and travelings and Sinbad the sailor, and that continued for 1,001 nights. After that, he was in love with Shahrazad, and he didn't kill her. So I checked, and that impressive ancient civilization actually was dominated by 16 empires with hundreds and hundreds of kings. But remember, every king has his own wars. Every city, every great city is built on the ruins of another city. So I found out that eventually that civilization was so good, the area was so impressive. You know that where those two rivers, the land between two rivers, when they meet, there's a tree called Adam's tree. And there's a fruit. And people think that this was the same fruit that the snake gave to Eve, which gave it to Adam. So, what happened is that during my life there, 18% of my life, there were wars. And 78% of my life, the country was ruled by one of the beasts. Right? You have to believe the worst beasts are not in the wilderness. They are not from the forest. They are from wombs, from human wombs. The kind of suffering the people had, the torture, the death, the absence of rights is something you cannot imagine. So I started my trips. I'm the grandson, maybe the grandson of Sinbad the sailor, so I started my trips. And I visited maybe 15 countries in search for the fortune. Well, the fortune was not in the ocean of oil under the ground of my country. I want you just to look around you to feel that you have a fortune. We all have a fortune. The freedom, the respect of rights. If you're respected like a human being, it's a fortune. It's not in the history. It's not in the oil underground. That country is the richest underground, the poorest overground. Be thankful. Enjoy the fortune. Thank you.